You know, one of the oldest churches in Spain is found in Compostela. And that church is associated with the Apostle Saint James, Santiago. That is why the patron of Santiago, or the patron of Compostela, is called Santiago de Compostela. Of course, we know that this James is the brother of Saint John. They are sons of Zebedee, and they are part of the inner core group of Jesus. You know, the Church of Compostela in Spain is not only the mother church of Spain, it is actually the nerve center of all the pilgrimage routes in Europe, popularly known as the CAMINO, El Camino, and that is the Spanish for the way. It is supposed to be the most popular kind of retreat in the world. It's not about staying in a retreat house under the direction of a retreat master, but rather about walking with fellow pilgrims to Compostela while reflecting on nothing else but your own life's journey and sharing it with complete strangers along the way. They say inevitably the pilgrims find Jesus in each other as they walk and as they break bread with each other. They get to discover the way of Jesus. Or even better, they get to discover Jesus the way. Well, I think I've told you in other homilies that the Christian faith was originally called the way, ang daan, ang landas. And of course, what they mean is the way of Jesus. Ano ba yung landas na ito? What is the way of Jesus? Well, today's gospel is sort of answering that question for the apostles James and John. Ito yung passage which recalls how Jesus had rerouted life's journey for these two brothers. But first, it is telling us about the way of ambition, which their mother was pursuing for the two sons. Alam nyo naman, most parents are ambitious talaga for their children. And it seems that James and John had also owned their mother's ambition for them, which was to become great, ang maging dakila. Paano? How? Well, by aspiring for positions of power in the community, the movement of Jesus. By wanting to be seated down, one on the right and the other on the left in His kingdom. And the answer of Jesus is, hindi nyo alam ang hinihiling ninyo. You do not know what you're asking for. I imagine God sometimes saying the same things to people who are asking for all kinds of things when they pray, all kinds of favors from Him. Siguro minsan gustong sabihin ni God sa atin, hindi mo alam yung hinihingi mo. You do not know what you are asking for. At mabuti na lang, God does not just grant anything that we ask for. I find it very heartwarming that Jesus does not tell James and John na masama yung mag-ambisyong maging dakila. Actually, Jesus explains to them in a roundabout way na totoo naman tinawag sila upang maging dakila. They were called to greatness. But that power or positions of authority were not the path or the way to true greatness. So, kung hindi yon, what is it then? You know, the common structure followed by the three Gospels, St. Matthew, St. Mark, and St. Luke, you know, tells us that Jesus is traveling, journeying. He's coming from Galilee and his destination is Jerusalem. Isang direksyon lang. From Galilee to Jerusalem. And between Galilee and Jerusalem, there is that whole part which is called usually the on the way section. Yung bang wala na sila sa Galilee, pero wala pa sila sa Jerusalem, they are on the way. And it is along the way that they misunderstand Jesus several times. Kung ano ba yung mission niya, ano bang hangarin ng pagpunta niya sa Jerusalem. Because these two brothers, they were thinking he would go to Jerusalem to establish his kingdom, you know. Kaya gusto na kaagad nila ng posisyon. Well, the first misunderstanding comes from St. Peter. Remember that scene? He blocked the way of Jesus because Jesus was talking about going to Jerusalem to suffer and die, to be crucified. Well, Jesus rebuked Peter and warned him that he was allowing himself to be used by Satan as a stumbling block. He was not called to be a stumbling block. He was rather called to be the rock foundation of the church. And Jesus would explain to him that the way that he's talking about, the path of discipleship, is the cross. That's the first misunderstanding. Mauulit na naman ito. The second misunderstanding is when the disciples are arguing with one another kung sino daw ba sa kanila ang pinakasikat, pinakadakila. And Jesus, in answer to their arguments with one another, imbes na mag-explain siya, kumuha siya ng bata at nilagay yung bata in the middle of them. You know, it was his manner of explaining that his way is the path of littleness, the path of childlikeness. And of course, the third misunderstanding is by James and John. Ito yung gospel natin ngayon. Kaya lang kay Matthew, it's the mother, it's not James and John themselves. Well, Jesus is explaining to them the way to greatness is not by lording it over other people, but rather by being servant leaders. Servant leaders. Ayun. You know, as we prepare for the elections in May, we really must pray very hard that the Lord will grant us people, not people who will lord it over, but rather people with a heart of servant leaders. Kaya lang, servant leadership is something people often do not understand. Kasi dito sa mundo, yung leaders do not serve, and servants do not lead. But in the world of Jesus, they always go together. Hindi tunay ang leadership kung walang servanthood. And si St. Luke, dun sa kanyang last chapter, he tells us a story about two disciples who are on the way. But they are running away from Jerusalem. Kasi in-associate nila ang Jerusalem with the traumatic experience of the suffering and death, of failure. They find themselves on the way, but they are in the wrong way. Being on the way is not always about being in the right way. And that wrong way is the path of self-preservation. And Jesus had to walk with them para ibaliktad yung direksyon nila to lead them back to Jerusalem. Well, alam nyo, there is a stage in life when we find ourselves really having to decide kung anong landas ang patutunguhan natin. Kapag nagdidesisyon tayo, para tayong pumipili ng landas sa isang daan na nagsasanga. Dito sa Caloocan, sikat yung sangandaan. Ibig sabihin, yung daan nagsanga. At kailangan mong pumili alin ang landas na tama, aling landas ang mali. Well, sometimes we get confused because halos wala kang nakikitang landas. Merong isang Spanish poet, who composed a song about that. Ang sabi niya sa kanyang poem, "Caminando no hay camino, se hace camino al andar." Kung ita-translate natin sa English, walking where there is no way, you make the way while you are walking. Naglalakad ka ng walang landas, pero ginagawa mo yung landas sa paglalakad mo. You make the path while you walk. And you will not get lost as long as you have as your travel companion Jesus Himself, the way. You will discover as you go along that He indeed is the way and the truth and the life.